On May 26, 2025, Nebraska observes Memorial Day, honoring over 5,000 Nebraskans who perished in military service, their courage a cornerstone of the Heartland spirit. These young men, rooted in family farms and businesses across towns like Lincoln and Scottsbluff, dreamed of shaping Nebraska's future, but died in wars from World War I to post 9/11 conflicts, betrayed by the state's corrupt and neglectful leaders. While these brave warriors fought to defend America, Nebraska's governors, congressional delegates, and legislators failed to protect them, sending them to perish in conflicts driven by deceit and catastrophic military plans. Nebraska's fallen were sacrificed for no benefit to the state or nation. World War I, an avoidable conflict, claimed 700 Nebraskans in Europe's trenches for banker profits, while World War II, necessitating a response to Pearl Harbor, cost 3,800 lives due to inept leadership. The Korean and Vietnam Wars, sparked by suspicious pretexts, took nearly 800 Nebraskans in feudal stalemates, and the Gulf Wars and post-9/11 conflicts killed over 100 for corporate gain. Governors like Keith Neville, Dwight Griswold, and Pete Ricketts, alongside congressional allies, sent these youths to die under reckless military leadership, marked by poorly coordinated strategies and negligent planning, neglecting Nebraska's security. The economic toll devastated Nebraska's heartland. Family farms faced inflation as war spending drained resources, while businesses in towns like Omaha struggled under national debt. Communities where young Nebraskans were taken, some never to return, saw labor shortages cripple agriculture and economic vitality wane. Socially, towns grappled with veterans' trauma and division, worsened by leaders who failed to address crises like foreign immigration, leaving Nebraska vulnerable. This Memorial Day, we honor Nebraska's fallen by confronting this treachery. While they defended America, Nebraska's leaders did not defend them, prioritizing globalist agendas over state interests. Voters and parents must demand accountability, ending this cycle of betrayal. We introduce Nebraska's leadership betrayal, sacrificing Heartland sons in corrupt global wars. A report detailing this leadership failure and its toll on Nebraska's communities. As we place flags on graves, we remember our warriors' sacrifice and resolve to protect Nebraska's future, ensuring their courage inspires a state free from corrupt leadership's betrayal. Since its admission to the Union in 1867, Nebraska has stood as a beacon of heartland resilience, its young men embodying courage, patriotism, and an unwavering commitment to their communities. Yet its governors, congressional delegates, state legislators, and mayors have woven a tragic tapestry of betrayal, sending these sons to perish in foreign wars driven by corrupt financial motives, geopolitical power plays, and suspicious pretexts. From World War I to the present, Nebraska's leadership has failed to shield its youth from federal entanglements in conflicts orchestrated by America's inept, duplicitous, and foolish leadership, including Nebraska's own congressional delegates. These wars, World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, the Gulf Wars, and post-9/11 conflicts, were sparked by deceit, escalated for profit, and mismanaged by disastrous military plans, costing Nebraska over 5,000 lives and leaving the state and nation vulnerable to foreign invaders and domestic crises. Each conflict should have taught leaders to reject these futile endeavors, prioritizing a secure Nebraska and America over globalist agendas. Instead, governors from Keith Neville to Jim Pillen, alongside senators, representatives, and legislators, perpetuated a cycle of sacrifice, reflecting the broader treachery of American leadership. This betrayal extends beyond the battlefield, as Nebraska's leaders ignored the state's economic strain, with wars burdening family farms, businesses, and towns where young men were taken, some never to return, and failed to protect communities from the social upheaval caused by returning veterans scarred by senseless wars. The pattern of sending Nebraska's finest to die for external interests, while neglecting homeland security, reveals a leadership steeped in cowardice and complicity, a legacy that continues to erode the state's and nation's strength and sovereignty. World War I, 1917 to 1918. under Governor Keith Neville, saw Nebraska send 28,000 young men to a European slaughter driven by imperial rivalries and banker profits, a conflict that could have been avoided and offered no benefit to Nebraska or America. President Woodrow Wilson's reckless decision to sail ships through German U-boat zones provoked the Lusitania's sinking, killing 128 Americans, a pretext inflated by the Zimmerman telegram. A German proposal to Mexico dismissed by Mexico, but exploited to justify war. Senators George Norris and Gilbert Hitchcock, alongside Representatives Charles Sloan, Charles Reavis, Albert Jeffress, Robert Evans, William Andrews, and Moses Kincaid, supported Wilson's war effort. The Nebraska legislature, in its 1917 to 1918 sessions, endorsed mobilization, failing to question the war's suspicious origins or its irrelevance to state and national security. The military's inept trench warfare plans, ignoring Allied lessons, led to 26,000 American deaths in the Meuse-Argonne offensive, including over 700 Nebraskans. These reckless strategies, coupled with poor coordination at battles like St. Mihiel, where 7,000 Americans died from misdirected artillery, reflected America's deceitful leadership. Neville and his congressional allies, complicit in this betrayal, sent Nebraska's youth to die under catastrophic military plans that wasted lives for no benefit to Nebraska or America. The war's economic toll strained Nebraska's family farms, small businesses, and small towns as federal demands for war funding diverted resources from local needs, leaving communities to mourn sons who never returned, disrupting agricultural labor and local economies. World War II, 1941 to 1945, under Governors Dwight Griswold and Robert Cochrane, was a conflict that could not be avoided after Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor, which demanded a decisive victory over Japan. Nebraska's young men rose valiantly, with over 100,000, about 10.6% of the state's estimated 1.3 million population, answering the call, significantly contributing to honorable campaigns in the Pacific and Europe to secure retribution. However, they fought under deplorable military leadership, a reflection of America's duplicitous and incompetent leadership, including Nebraska's own. The Pearl Harbor attack was marred by ignored intelligence warnings, a suspect failure of national leaders like President Franklin D. Roosevelt, whose two-front strategy diverted resources from Pacific vengeance to an unnecessary European campaign. Senators Hugh Butler and Kenneth Wary, with Representatives Carl Curtis, John Sweet, Harry Coffey, Orrin Copeland, and Charles McLaughlin, backed Roosevelt's policies. The Nebraska legislature, in its 1941 to 1945 sessions, facilitated the draft, ignoring alternatives like focusing on one war at a time. Military plans were disastrously flawed. In the Pacific, the failure to secure the Philippines led to the Bataan Death March, killing 10,000. At Midway, misjudged deployments cost 300 lives, and at Leyte Gulf, reckless tactics nearly lost the battle. In Europe, the Normandy invasion's high cost of 29,000 lives ignored flanking options, while supply failures triggered the Battle of the Bulge, killing 19,000. These negligent plans, tied to corporate interests, cost Nebraska 3,800 lives. Griswold, Cochrane, and their congressional counterparts sent brave Nebraskans to die under inept leadership, failing to challenge the war's flawed priorities. The war's financial burden strained Nebraska's family life, economy, and communities where young men were taken, some never to return, with increased taxes and war bonds pressuring rural families, while the social cost of returning veterans, many traumatized, disrupted communities. Despite the necessity of answering Pearl Harbor with a decisive victory over Japan, the catastrophic leadership ensured that Nebraska and America reaped little lasting benefit, with the state's sons sacrificed for globalist agendas. These wars established Nebraska's leaders as complicit in federal treachery. World War I, an avoidable conflict, and World War II, though justified by Pearl Harbor's attack, saw governors, delegates, and legislators fail to address the wars rooted in deceit and catastrophic military plans, prioritizing neither Nebraska's nor America's security. Instead, they deepened the state's involvement, ignoring the debt, deaths, and economic strain, betraying their valiant youth who deserved better leadership. The Korean War, 1950 to 1953, under Governor Val Peterson, sent over 10,000 Nebraskans to a Cold War proxy conflict marred by suspicious U.S. intelligence failures that ignored Chinese troop buildups, offering no benefit to Nebraska or America. Senators Hugh Butler and Kenneth Wary, alongside Representatives Howard Buffett, Arthur Miller, Carl Stephan, and Robert Harrison, supported President Harry S. Truman's intervention. The Nebraska legislature, in its 1949 to 1953 sessions, endorsed federal policies, resulting in nearly 400 Nebraskan deaths in a stalemate. The military's reckless plans, like the march to the Yalu River, provoked China's entry, killing 2,800 at Chosin Reservoir, while static defenses at Port Chop Hill cost 1,500 lives for a meaningless outpost. These deplorable strategies, reflecting America's deceitful leadership, squandered lives for no gain. Peterson and his congressional allies, complicit in this betrayal, failed to question the war's escalation or its irrelevance to state and national security, sending youth to die under catastrophic military leadership. The war's economic impact devastated Nebraska's family farms, small businesses, and small towns, where young men were taken, some never to return, as federal war spending drove inflation, raising costs for agricultural equipment and supplies, while the loss of young men disrupted rural labor forces. Families faced not only grief, but also social isolation, as communities struggled to support returning veterans haunted by the war's futility. The Vietnam War, 1955 to 1975, under Governors Frank Morrison, Norbert Tiemann, and James Exon, saw 15,000 Nebraskans fight, with 396 killed, in a conflict rooted in the fabricated Gulf of Tonkin incident, inflated by U.S. naval provocations, yielding no advantage for Nebraska or America. Senators Roman Ruska and Carl Curtis, with Representatives Glenn Cunningham, David Martin, Robert Denny, and John McAllister, backed President Lyndon B. Johnson's escalation. The Nebraska legislature, in its 1961 to 1975 sessions, supported mobilization, ignoring the war's suspicious roots. Military plans were disastrous. Search and destroy missions like Hamburger Hill cost 400 lives for an abandoned hill, while rushed Vietnamization collapsed defenses, prolonging the war. CIA-orchestrated coups against allies like No Din Diem fueled chaos, reflecting America's incompetent leadership. Morrison, Tiemann, Exon, and their congressional counterparts sent Nebraskans to die under deplorable military leadership, failing to challenge the war's corrupt motives. The war's social toll was profound, as Nebraska's towns faced division, while economic pressures from war-related inflation strained families and businesses, compounding the grief of families whose sons never returned. These Asian wars deepened Nebraska's leadership betrayal. Each conflict's deceitful origins and catastrophic military plans should have taught governors and delegates to protect their youth from federal treachery, safeguarding both Nebraska and America. Instead, they perpetuated a cycle of sacrifice, ignoring the mounting debt, deaths, economic strain, and social upheaval, failing to secure the state or nation under America's deceitful leadership. The First Gulf War, 1990 to 1991, under Governor Ben Nelson, sent 5,000 Nebraskans to a conflict driven by oil and geopolitical interests, sparked by Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, offering no lasting benefit to Nebraska or America. Senators Bob Kerrey and James Exon, alongside Representatives Doug Bruder, Peter Hoagland, and Virginia Smith, supported President George Bush's coalition. The Nebraska legislature, in its 1989 to 1991 sessions, backed federal resolutions, resulting in minimal deaths but a legacy of Middle Eastern entanglement. The military's negligent plans, underestimating resistance, prolonged U.S. presence, reflecting America's reckless leadership. Nelson and his congressional allies failed to question the war's financial motives or its irrelevance to state and national security, sending youth to fight under catastrophic military leadership that enriched corporations. The war's economic impact strained Nebraska's budget, as federal war costs increased national debt, indirectly raising taxes and diverting funds from state infrastructure. Socially, the war's media-driven narrative created a false sense of victory, masking its long-term costs to Nebraska's communities, which faced the return of veterans struggling to reintegrate. 9/11 conflicts in Afghanistan, 2001 to 2021, and Iraq, 2003 to 2011, under Governors Mike Johans, Dave Heineman, and Pete Ricketts, cost over 100 Nebraskan lives, yielding no strategic advantage for Nebraska or America. The 9/11 attacks, an inside job, marred by missed FBI and CIA warnings, provided a pretext for occupations called wars under Presidents George Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden. Senators Chuck Hagel and Ben Nelson, with Representatives Doug Bruder, Lee Terry, Tom Osborne, Jeff Fortenberry, and Adrian Smith, supported the authorization for use of military force. The Nebraska legislature, in its 2001 to 2021 sessions, endorsed these wars despite their flawed intelligence. Military plans were disastrous. Understaffed Iraq invasions fueled insurgency, killing 4,400 Americans. Restrictive rules in Afghanistan, like bans on night raids, increased deaths, and the Bachkabul withdrawal left 13 dead due to unsecured perimeters. These inept strategies, reflecting America's deceitful leadership, squandered lives for corporate profit. Johans, Heineman, Ricketts, and their congressional counterparts sent Nebraskans to die under deplorable military leadership, leaving Nebraska and America vulnerable to foreign invaders. The war's economic toll was severe, as federal spending ballooned the deficit, straining Nebraska's citizens, while the social cost of veterans' mental health crises and community division further weakened the state. These Middle Eastern wars underscored Nebraska's leadership treachery. Governors and delegates should have rejected wars rooted in deceit and catastrophic military plans, prioritizing state and national security. Instead, they perpetuated a cycle of sacrifice, ignoring the debt, deaths, economic strain, and social costs, failing to protect Nebraska or America under America's reckless leadership. Since 2015, Governors Pete Ricketts and Jim Pillen have led Nebraska during a crisis of border invasion, military infiltration, and health mandates, notably COVID-19, offering no benefit to Nebraska or America. Senators Deb Fischer and Pete Ricketts, alongside Representatives Mike Flood, Don Bacon, and Adrian Smith, have prioritized foreign aid and military engagements abroad, neglecting Nebraska's and America's borders. The Nebraska legislature, in its 2023 to 2025 sessions, has failed to enact border security, allowing foreign nationals and insurgents to infiltrate. The Nebraska National Guard, under Pillen's command, remains inactive, while compliance with federal health mandates has weakened the state. Military leadership, reflecting America's deceitful and reckless leadership, continues to deploy Nebraskans abroad under catastrophic plans, as seen in past wars, while domestic threats grow. Pillen, Fisher, Ricketts, Flood, Bacon, Smith, and their legislative counterparts, complicit in national treachery, have abandoned Nebraska's and America's security, sending youth to fight while invaders exploit the state. The economic impact of ongoing military deployments and health mandates has strained Nebraska's budget, diverting funds from local needs like education and infrastructure. Socially, communities face division over immigration and health policies, compounding the betrayal of families whose sons are sent to die abroad. Past wars' disastrous military leadership should have taught them to reject federal entanglements. Yet they perpetuate betrayal, leaving Nebraska and America exposed to external threats and internal discord. This era reflects the culmination of Nebraska's leadership failures. Governors, delegates, and legislators have failed to learn from a century of corrupt wars and catastrophic military plans, prioritizing globalist agendas over state and national sovereignty under America's reckless leadership. Their inaction amid domestic crises underscores their treachery, as Nebraska's youth continue to suffer for federal missteps, while communities grapple with economic and social fallout. Nebraska's history since 1867 reveals a tragic betrayal by Governors Keith Neville, Dwight Griswold, Robert Cochran, Val Peterson, Frank Morrison, Norbert Tiemann, James Exon, Ben Nelson, Mike Johans, Dave Heinemann, Pete Ricketts, and Jim Pillen, alongside congressional delegates and compliant legislatures. These leaders sent over 150,000 Nebraskans to die in World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, the Gulf Wars, and post-9/11 conflicts under deplorable military leadership that reflected America's deceitful and reckless leadership. Wars driven by deceit, Lusitania's provocation, Pearl Harbor's negligence, Tonkin's fabrications, 9/11's missed warnings, and catastrophic plans like Meuse-Argonne, Bataan, Hamburger Hill, and Kabul's withdrawal cost over 5,000 Nebraskan lives, accumulating debt and leaving the state and nation vulnerable to invaders and health crises. Each conflict should have taught leaders to reject federal treachery and prioritize Nebraska's and America's security. The economic toll of these wars burdened Nebraska's farms, businesses, and towns, where young men were taken, some never to return, while the social cost of returning veterans and community division weakened the state's fabric. The ultimate fault lies with Nebraska's citizens and voters, who bear a profound responsibility for allowing their sons to be taken for wars that enriched bankers and globalists, costing families their lineage. These citizens, through their acquiescence, have enabled a cycle of treachery that has spanned generations, failing to hold leaders accountable at every level. Governors, congressional delegates, state legislators, and mayors for their complicity in sending Nebraska's youth to die in senseless conflicts. Parents and families, in honoring the bravery and memory of their fallen sons, do not diminish their legacy by demanding an end to this betrayal. Instead, they must rise as a unified force, insisting that their fellow Nebraskans and Americans reject these wars and hold leaders accountable for their treacherous decisions. The courage of Nebraska's young men, who fought valiantly despite deplorable leadership, deserves a legacy of change, not continued sacrifice. Voters must demand that leaders prioritize Nebraska's and America's security, rejecting globalist agendas and ensuring no more sons are lost to corrupt wars. This call for accountability extends to every citizen who must recognize their role in breaking the cycle of insanity, ensuring that Nebraska's heartland values are protected and that the state's and nation's future is not marred by the same betrayals that have cost so many lives. Families, grieving yet resolute, must lead this charge, honoring their sons by forging a Nebraska and America free from the treachery of its leaders, whose corrupt decisions under America's reckless leadership have weakened the state and nation, betraying the Heartland's values and future. On May 26, 2025, Nebraska paused to honor over 5,000 fallen heroes, their courage etched in the Heartland soul. From World War I's muddy trenches to the deserts of post-9/11 conflicts, these sons of Lincoln, Scottsbluff, and Omaha dreamed of a vibrant Nebraska, but were betrayed by corrupt leaders. Governors like Keith Neville, Dwight Griswold, and Pete Ricketts, alongside congressional delegates and legislators, sent them to die in wars rooted in deceit. World War I for banker profits, Vietnam on fabricated pretexts, and Iraq for corporate gain. These conflicts, driven by catastrophic military plans, offered no benefit to Nebraska or America, costing lives, crippling farms, and fracturing communities. World War II's necessity after Pearl Harbor was marred by inept leadership, while Korea and the Gulf Wars squandered lives for globalist agendas. Economic strain from war debts and inflation devastated Nebraska's agriculture, with towns like North Platte, McCook, and Alliance facing despair and labor shortages as young men never returned. Socially, veterans' trauma and unchecked immigration deepened division, ignored by leaders who failed to secure the state. Today's crisis, foreign infiltration and health mandates, echoes this treachery. Governors Jim Pillen and Pete Ricketts, with Senators Deb Fischer and congressional allies, prioritize foreign aid over Nebraska's borders, leaving the state vulnerable. The Nebraska legislature's inaction and compliance with federal overreach betray the fallen, whose sacrifices demand a secure heartland. We unveil Nebraska's leadership betrayal, Sacrificing Heartland Sons in Corrupt Global Wars, a report exposing this century-long failure. It details how governors, delegates, and legislators sent 150,000 Nebraskans to senseless deaths, accumulating debt and neglecting homeland security under America's reckless leadership. Nebraskans, your fallen demand justice. Voters, parents, and families must rise, holding leaders accountable for betraying our sons. Demand an end to globalist wars and border neglect. Support new leadership at town halls, rallies, and in the voting booth. Elect leaders who prioritize Nebraska's security, rejecting federal treachery. Parents, protect your children from future wars by advocating for state sovereignty. Citizens, honor the 5,000 by forging a Nebraska free from corrupt leadership. Act now. Attend local meetings, pressure legislators, and vote out complicit officials. Break the cycle of betrayal, ensuring no more Heartland sons are sacrificed.